Collaborative.
Sorry.
No worries. Welcome to the first session in the Essential Skills in Volunteer Management Learning Collaborative, brought to you by the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. Today's session, we're going to be focusing on capturing volunteer motivation and conducting effective interviews. And we have our facilitator, Nikki Miller, here with us today. This shows you a little bit of the structure for the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. And so we have 4 core teams, one focusing on clinical integration of peer recovery support services. My team is the Recovery Community Organization Capacity Building team. We have a team that focuses on workforce development. And then the final team for evidence-based practice identification and dissemination team. And our portal on our website at peerrecoverynow.org is now open, and we are accepting requests for those 4 areas. If you have any questions about the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, feel free to message Cindy or I, and we'll certainly answer anything we can. And if we don't have the answer, we'll find somebody who does. And we always like to have a discussion around if we want addiction destigmatized, we need a language that's unified. The words we use matter. Caution needs to be taken, especially when the disorders concerned are heavily stigmatized as substance use disorders are. And that was taken from recoveryanswers.org. They have a wonderful dictionary resource on their page that talks about different terminology used in the field of substance use disorders and addictions. And we always want to make sure we're using person-first language, so we don't label somebody as their disease or their diagnosis, that they are a human being, a person first. A little bit of housekeeping. As we go through this first session of a 6-month-long learning collaborative, so this is module 1 of 8, a little bit of housekeeping. So we love seeing your faces. So when possible, be brave, be courageous, have your cameras on. It's morning for everyone, so, it's okay. I think we've all learned to navigate Zoom. We're at home. We have, sometimes kids, sometimes pets. That's okay. We'd love you to see your cameras on and participate as much as possible whenever possible. Reminder that today's event is being recorded. These recordings will be made public for 1 year. Please keep your line muted. Just when you're not talking, there may be opportunities to unmute yourself and talk, but for the most part, try to keep your line muted when you're not participating in conversations. And then feel free, as always, use the chat feature throughout the training. Use the chat feature to ask questions, talk to other attendees in the group, and make comments or express your opinions or thoughts about what the facilitator is presenting. And I'm going to stop sharing now and hand it over to Nikki Miller, and she'll be our fabulous presenter today. And we'll just give her a second while she gets her slides up and running.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Give me some thumbs up. I see so many of you on video. Good. Yay. Awesome. All right. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for having me today. My name is Nikki Miller. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a trainer with MAVA. So I've been doing these volunteer leadership trainings for more years than I can count, and I really enjoy doing them. My regular job outside of this kind of side gig is working for Planned Parenthood. I work for the North Central States affiliate, which covers Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Nebraska. I've been there for around 20 years. A big bulk of that time was spent working on volunteer management. So have a lot of years of experience leading a fairly large volunteer program for that affiliate, and doing some national work with Planned Parenthood's National Volunteer and like leadership development and community engagement strategy. But more recently, my job title right now, I actually don't work with volunteers anymore. I'm the interim VP of organizational effectiveness. So right now, a lot of like learning and development and internal communications and employee engagement rather than community or volunteer engagement. So, but I'm really excited to talk with folks about volunteer management topics. There's a lot of overlap there, of course. And as part of this training series, hopefully you'll really enjoy going through all of it. I found it really valuable. When I first attended it, I feel like I continue to learn new things from everyone who's in these trainings. So please be encouraged to come off mute, to share any insights that you have throughout the training, to chime in on the chat. And then also we're going to be using Menti or Mentimeter. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's basically an online tool that we'll be using to generate some word clouds, to go through and do some polling and stuff like that. So it's just an option to be a little more interactive in a virtual environment. So I'm going to share that now. If you could go to, I'll give you a code in a minute. So what I'm going to have you do in a second is go to menti.com, and you can either do that in a separate browser window, or I find it's a little easier if you have a phone or a mobile device or anything like that to track along, to go in on that. So I'll give you, you'll go to menti.com. I saw it was in the chat, and I'll give you a code for logging in just a second. All right. Well, cool. Can folks see my screen? Okay, we're going to give Menti a test run here. So again, go to menti.com, either in a new browser window, or you can use a mobile device or another device if you have one nearby. And then once you get there, I'm going to have you type in the code 7662-6115. And that will get us into our room. Thank you, Wendy. I see it's in the chat too. Wendy put everything in the chat.
I was just saying server cannot be found, so I'm getting ready to try on my computer or something.
Okay, yeah. Let us know if you're not able to use it. You can always chime in with some of the same information in the chat too. So the question, if you're not in there yet, is what's motivating you this week? Since what we're going to talk about today to kick off this series is volunteer motivation and how to conduct effective interviews. I'll give a little introduction to why we're covering those together today. But since we're talking about motivation, what is motivating you this week? Hopefully some good stuff. I'm seeing a lot of recovery, awesome. Gratitude, hope, relationships, warm weather, peers, dreams, obligation, spring, grace, spring on the way, warm weather, my pup, community support, passion, connection, family, friends and family. Ooh, a new baby, job duties. So hopefully you're seeing some of these, seeing a lot of focus on recovery, family, gratitude, hope, relationships, passion, sunshine. So a lot of themes, goals, school. So good stuff. Love. Thank you, Linda. Awesome. So a lot of themes, but it's kind of all over the place, right? We all have very different motivations. So we're going to talk about today how to tap into that as you're working with communities or with volunteers. Because as you can see, there are some themes, but motivation is very different for everyone. And not only that, it changes over time, it changes day by day. So we will talk about how to tap into that in this session. So this first module, I'm going to move on here. So again, we're covering two topics today, volunteer motivation and interviews. So this covers two concepts which kind of are designed to be separate or standalone. They're a little different, capturing motivation and conducting effective interviews. So even though they're kind of separate concepts, as you'll notice with a lot of parts of this series, all of these concepts are really integral components of a successful program, and they inform each other. So you'll see, like, as you go through all of these modules, you'll see that there are concepts that you can cross apply at other times. So For example, we'll talk about motivational style and how everyone, even though motivation can change with time and day to day and depending on the circumstances, you can kind of tap into different motivational styles, and we'll talk about those and how to identify, you know, what yours are and what others, what they might be for others. So that's a concept that we're going to talk about today because it really frames up a lot of the other parts of this series. So motivational style can inform interviews, which we'll talk about in the latter half of this morning, because you want to understand what's motivating someone to actually come volunteer with you. And a good way to learn about that is by conducting an interview and making sure that there's a good match between what you're looking for someone to do for your organization and what someone wants to get out of it, what motivates them to get involved and what's going to motivate them to continue to work with your organization or with your mission or whatever you're working on. Additionally, you'll see motivational style show up. We'll talk about in a future learning module, we'll talk about something like recognition, how you recognize an individual volunteer. Everyone has a different idea of what is meaningful recognition, and understanding what motivates them to be in the first place can also be the key to understanding how they like to be recognized. How to supervise someone effectively. Good idea to understand what's motivating them to be there in the first place and to stay there over time. So you'll notice again, just that a lot of these different concepts build on each other. And so you'll see a lot of this get revisited throughout the series. So, so beginning with motivation, like I said, it changes over time and it changes during the day. So during, day to day. So while it's important when someone comes in to understand what's motivating them to be there so that you can understand what sort of volunteer role to put them in. Also, you want to continue to assess and respond to their motivational needs throughout their tenure with your organization and their time with you. So the interview is just that first opportunity to assess that and respond to it, but find opportunities to continue to do it over time. Another thing I'm going to point out, so there are handouts for all of these different modules throughout the series. So I will refer back to different handouts throughout the training today. You'll also notice down in the bottom of the slide, I'm of course pointing to it on my computer screen, so if you can see where I'm pointing, down at the bottom of the screen, anytime there's a handout that corresponds with what I'm covering, you'll see it actually called out on the screen. So that's kind of a helpful guidepost if you want to follow along on the handouts. Those handouts, you want to hold on to them too, because they have a lot of these modules will cover a lot of information that may be like a universe of way too much for you to handle right now. But later on, you can kind of use it as a toolkit. Anytime that you want to make any sort of changes to your programming, you can go back if you say down the line, oh, wow, we're going to do a big, we'd like to evaluate all of our volunteer programs. And I remember I learned about that in that MAVA training. What are the types of evaluation and how can I conduct them? You can grab that toolkit and it'll have all that information right in there. In addition to the trainings also being recorded for you to revisit later on. So any questions before we get started on motivation? You can come off mute or share in the chat, which I will take a peek at right now. Okay, so it looks like there's some troubleshooting in the chat. Did folks get their handouts? So it looks like the handouts are via the link. Are folks hearing me okay? All right, any questions? All right, then what I would like you to do.
The sound is still low. I don't know what happened. I was hearing you loud and clear, but then now all of a sudden the sound went down. I don't know.
Is anyone else having problems, or is it might be an issue on Linda's end?
This is Micah Pearson with NAMI Southern New Mexico. I do a lot of Zoom troubleshooting. You're probably getting some auto ducking from your cell phone. You might want to check the sound settings on your cell phone for the sound output, because she's coming through crystal clear for the rest of us.
Okay.
Thank you. That's something I haven't heard of. That's new. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions or anything we need to address before we move in? Okay. And I know Wendy, I know I said that we would only do one breakout, but I think I forgot how large this group is going to be. So why don't we go into breakout just for 5 minutes? And so you said there are around 60 people. How many breakout rooms? Let's say, could we have breakout rooms of 5, Wendy?
Yep, absolutely. Just let me know for how long and when you're ready.
Cool. Sounds good. So once you're in breakout, I would just like you to briefly, again, share your name, the organization you're with, and your geographic location, and just share, think through your motivation for volunteering at some point in your life within a specific organization. Think back on whether or not that organization motivated you to stay. Did they recognize what was motivating you to be there in the first place? And did they respond to that in some way? So that could be if you went in and said, you know, I'm really interested in getting involved in this recovery community because I had a really great one-on-one experience with someone who I met once, and I really want to have like a one-on-one mentorship relationship with someone because I really gained from that in the past. So I'd like to do that for your organization. And they bring you in, you've stated your motivational need, but then they're like, you know, actually what we need you to do is go in the back room and file every week. And we don't actually have any opportunities for you to speak one-on-one with anyone. So that would be an example of a mismatch in matching someone's motivation to what they're doing. So think back on when you've gotten involved. And if you can't think of a volunteer opportunity, it could be an informal opportunity, like if you've gotten involved in your community in some way or helped out in some way, or you can think of a job. So think about what motivated you to be there. Did the organization even ask about it? And if either way, did they give you an opportunity that matched that motivation? And think about what was the impact on that. So if you could go into the breakouts, let's give you 10 minutes to discuss that. So try to keep it to under 2 minutes a person. So I will put those prompts back in the chat. Any questions before we send you out? Okay, so Wendy, you can go ahead and send everyone out. So again, groups of 5 and for 10 minutes.
Nicole, did you get the invite for the breakout room?
I don't think so, because my internet's being a little wonky and it just booted me out.
That's okay. I'll try to put you in again.
It might do it again. I don't know why.
Nicole, sometimes it helps if you dial in via your phone. It won't use as much bandwidth up if you're having a lot of connection problems. I know, actually, I don't think I shared the numbers. Let me see if I can get you a number to call in on just in case, okay? What area are you? Oh, she's in a room. Good.
I think we may have lost her. Oh, here she's back now.
Nicole, what area are you in? What part of the country?
I'm in Bristol, Vermont, and I work for Turning Point.
Okay, let me get you a number to dial in. Okay, I private messaged you, Nicole. Maybe try that number on your phone.
What, sorry, what now?
In the chat feature, I just private messaged you. There's a 10-digit number. It says New York after
Yep.
the East Coast. So if you're having trouble with your bandwidth,
Oh,
sometimes if you phone in and then turn off your sound in the meeting, it helps with both your sound and your bandwidth. That's not a very technical answer, but
okay. I usually don't have any trouble, so I don't know what's going on.
yeah. And I know you said you were out and came back in, so that's not a helpful thing to tell you to do. Or just being off video.
It's okay now.
Is it? Okay. Well, try, if you get it, try turning
Yeah.
off the video, and
Maybe I should just close my video and see if that,
that might be the easiest. Okay.
okay. Yeah, we'll see how that does.
Okay.
Okay.
Nicole, I try to move you into one of the breakout rooms again.
Okay.
And Wendy, I think I have the ability to set up the timing on the breakouts. I think I didn't look at it this time, but when you close the room, it still stays open for a minute for people to come back. I know you know this probably better than I do. But I'm happy to change any settings if you need me to.
Sounds great. Yeah, the way I've got it set up is they'll get a 60-second warning to wrap up their conversations.
Yeah.
Most people like to take the whole 60 seconds, so we may not see them back until
Yes,
60 seconds are done.
we've abruptly cut off people without knowing. So. All right, I'm gonna mute.
Looks like Nicole came back.
It
Nicole,
just keeps, yeah, it keeps booting me back. It like acts like it's gonna put me in the breakout room, and then it just boots me back to the main session.
oh, I'm sorry about that. Let's see, they've got just a couple more minutes. Do you want me to try one more time to see if you can get in there?
I was going to say, Nicole, if not, I don't know if you caught the prompt, but it was to think about a time you volunteered or were involved with an organization and what motivated you to be there, and whether or not the organization responded to that by putting you in an appropriate position or supervising you in a certain way or recognizing you in a certain way. So if you want to just think on that and it looks like we've got about 2 minutes. And if you want to take a little stretch break or grab a drink or anything like that, take a bio break, you can go ahead and do that as well.
All right, they now have their 60-second warning to wrap up and come back. Welcome back, folks. There's about 45 seconds left, and then everybody will be back.
Okay, looks like folks are starting to come back. Welcome back, everyone. All right. Is everyone back in? Not quite. Okay, give it a second.
I think when I got a text that came in, that's when my sound went down. Now it's back loud again.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and the same thing happened in the breakout room. I was in the breakout room, it was loud, then a text came in, then it went down low. So I'm seeing if I can maybe go on my phone, on my
I think, yeah, it
Are you
sounds like
on?
you're-
Are you on Android or iOS?
I'm on a Android, Apple.
Okay, so Apple is either okay. So you're on an Apple phone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't know if that's in iOS. I don't know if iOS
Yeah, that's
uses the
iOS.
Okay,
That's
I don't know
iOS.
if you might want to check to see if their notification volume setting is the same as their media volume setting, because that was a mistake they made in Android phones, which caused exactly what you're talking about. So, but they have different volume sliders within the settings on iOS. You can try that.
Thank you. Jeez, just a font of knowledge for us, Micah. Thank you so much. Okay, so in your groups, hopefully you had some nice conversations in your limited time together. What was coming up for folks? Feel free to chime in on the chat or come off mute. What themes were you hearing? What were your ahas? What did you share or hear about motivation in your groups?
In my group, me and I think her name might have been Chrissy or Chris, but we both kind of saying the same thing about having opportunities to grow, to grow. Yeah. In different areas, presentation, just different areas, opportunity to grow, that really helped us, motivated us as volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, having those developmental opportunities to learn and grow over time can really be a motivating factor to want to stay somewhere so you don't stagnate and keep doing the same stuff. So thank you.
This is Caddy, and I had like a gigantic aha moment, which was personally, I've been very satisfied with the volunteer thing that I've done because they tapped into what I love to do. And as an organization, I was saying to Caroline and Mary, we had one epic fail and one epic success because we actually tapped into the person's skill set.
Yeah.
And that's what we didn't do in one and we did in the other. And it's like, duh. But it's not that easy sometimes. So it's like, I can just see a revamp of how we're going to set this thing up so that we can really work with people so they go, ooh, I want to come back. So Thank you.
Yes, awesome. Yeah, so hopefully you all had some aha moments like that. So understanding what someone's skill set is and being able to respond to that can be really helpful. And also understanding, even though someone may have skills or experience in a certain way, make sure that's actually what they want to do with your organization. Because sometimes, like I used to work with a volunteer who was working on their PhD in something education related. And so we're thinking, oh, we'll bring this person in and have them do program design or evaluation. And really they were like, I have to do that for school all week. Can I just come in? And this is back when we had people work with an actual physical shredder. Can I just shred documents for like 2 hours a week for you? And that's all they did. And she was like, it was like my moment of Zen for the week to come in and just shred documents for 2 weeks. So ask people and they'll usually tell you, help them explore together. From the chat, we volunteer because it's rewarding for us. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really common reason people volunteer. So figure out how to recognize that. Do they want to talk about orientation to your organization's mission, impact of what they're doing, make those connections, peer support and seeing others grow into themselves. Yes. Micah, you have a hand up.
I couldn't find the hand up thing in here. So the one thing I did want to share was we had a lot of great feedback in our group about how people were getting involved out of gratitude and how they were actually getting involved with the organizations they actually initially received services from, which was also very cool. In my experience, I shared though was like the organization that was responsible for saving my life turned me away when I came to volunteer. They had zero interest in peers specifically volunteering and getting involved in any way, meaningful way. And we actually lost a lot of volunteers over the 4 years it took for me to wrest control of that organization away from those people.
Interesting. And I mean, and that's a great thing to bring up. And also if you're coming up with parameters like that, being really intentional about it. Why are you doing that? Like, why are you setting it? So for, in your example, as an alumnus of a program, why aren't you able to get involved? What is that an intentional reason? And say, if a program does have intentional, well-stated, well-reasoned arguments for doing that, how do you share that with community members who do want to get involved? Because you don't want to turn someone away altogether. You want them to continue to support your organization and support what you're doing. So even if an organization has a reason, and we'll talk about all sorts of stuff throughout this whole series around making good matches for volunteers with their role in the organization, around risk management. So I don't know that it was necessarily a risk management situation in your case, but sometimes we do have to turn volunteers away. And in that case, how do you have a clear, well-stated reason for doing that and be able to communicate that to someone so that even if you do need to turn someone away, they understand why. And we don't need to get into like the nuances of your situation, because it sounds like it was a very unique situation that you've dealt with. But we'll talk through all of that sort of stuff. Yes, thank you, Micah. Straight up bigotry. That's not good. Yes. So, and we'll talk a little, and generally too, that's a whole other topic too, around being inclusive in what you're doing and all of that. So thank you, Micah, for sharing. Anything else you want to add from your conversations?
Yeah, I'd like to share. Oops. You want to go, Ben?
Oh, sure. I was just going to mention that both Carrie and myself and my group had our initial motivation for volunteering was the service component of our own recoveries, kind of fulfilling that service piece.
Awesome. Yeah. So a lot of really personal reasons that people bring to volunteering as well. Absolutely.
And I was going to say the common thing in our group was paying it forward. You know, recognizing the issues that we were dealing with in our recovery and needing to reach out to others who were going through the same thing and paying it forward, letting them know that they were not alone.
Yep. Awesome. Yes. Thanks for sharing. Great. So it sounds like you all had great conversations, and hopefully it piques some curiosity for you about how you can develop your approach to make sure that you have an inclusive environment, you're welcoming people into the organization, and then responding to what's motivating them to come in the first place and to stay. So first concept from here that we want to talk about is around motivation. So understanding today, we want to talk about how, again, people are motivated by practically as many nuanced things as there are people in the world. What one person loves may be a nightmare to the next person. But many organizations never even ask why a volunteer is volunteering. So important to do from the get-go. A lot of organizations focus first on their organizational needs. You do need to do a little bit of that because, of course, you don't want to bring in the universe of everyone to do whatever they want. That's not a very strategic approach. So you want to find a balance between what does the organization actually need and what's going to carry forward your mission or strategy, but also will respond to the needs and interests and drive, motivational drive of your community members and the folks who want to contribute. And basically, As long as someone's motivational needs continue to be cared for, they're probably going to keep volunteering for you for as long as they need to, which is great. Those tenured volunteers who know your organization are really committed are kind of what make our jobs easy, right? So concepts that will solidify for you today is talking about how success will occur when we simultaneously meet everyone's needs. Of course, doing that perfectly all the time, maybe not possible, but getting as close as you can get to making that balance between what does the organization and its clients need, what does your staff need, and then what do your volunteers or your community supporters need in order for everyone to feel healthy and balanced, right? We'll talk a little bit more about motivational styles, like I mentioned, and then just remembering that motivations change over time. So again, a good way to understand a volunteer's motivation at the start is to interview them. So we'll talk about that in the second half, but some concepts in interviewing we'll want to make sure are concrete for you are that interviews should be the opportunity to learn about a volunteer's passions, so that you can design a role or match them to an appropriate role and make sure the organization overall is the right place for them to meet their unique needs. So we'll, in the second half, again, we'll cover 4 steps in the interview process, which are preparing for the interview, opening it, so welcoming someone, giving them that context, and making them feel like they're coming into an inclusive environment, actually conducting the interview, and then closing it for what to do in next steps. We'll also talk a little bit about skills on listening and designing questions to make for an effective interview. And on the key concept first, then, in motivation, it's important to think, again, of volunteering not just as a one-sided activity. I think a lot of organizations can tend to do this. It's easy to do because you're thinking about what are all the things that we need to accomplish, and then how can we make the energy or people power to do it, which is important. That's why we exist as organizations, is to serve communities and do our work. And working with volunteers can help us do that. However, it's better to think of it more as an exchange or a symbiotic relationship that can make that arrangement work over time. So think about, I'm going to have you go back to Menti in a second. Think about what happens when there's a mismatch there, when it's out of balance, when either the volunteers' needs are being met, but the organization's needs are not, or the organization's needs are met, but the volunteers' needs are not. So what are some short, long-term type implications for those? So first, we're going to talk about what happens if the volunteers' needs are met, but the organizations are not. So you can go to Menti again, enter the code 76626115, same as before, and just chime in with what happens if a volunteer's needs are being met, but the organization's needs are not. So it's in the chat for the code. Thank you again, Wendy. Outcomes will not match the goals of the organization is one potential impact. Yeah, absolutely. Decreased organizational support. The mission of the organization can fall to the wayside. Goals, vision, mission sidestep, lots on not fulfilling mission. Org still not developing, as if the volunteer wasn't there at all. Yeah, so why are we even using them? Inefficient use of time, more on mission and values not being fulfilled, lack of fidelity to mission or contracts, disconnect. Volunteers can be seen as a hassle rather than a help. Yeah, absolutely. They don't get asked to come back. Yeah, sometimes even working with volunteers sometimes can be, you kind of have to sell that to coworkers or colleagues in your organization. And if they are being matched with volunteers who aren't actually help them get their work done, they might not want to work with volunteers again. Other volunteers can fall off. Yep. Need to find more volunteers. Absolutely. So lots of great ideas. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep going. And we're going to do flip side. What happens if the agency's needs are met, but not the volunteers? What are the potential impacts there? Burnout, yeah. Might lose volunteers, absolutely. That becomes a retention issue. Folks may lose the motivation to continue volunteering, absolutely. You're losing good resources. Folks may feel resentful towards the organization or put less effort into their work. Folks might lose interest, get bored, lack motivation. Yeah, so ultimately anger in volunteers towards everyone around. Yeah, so anger, resentment, bad word of mouth. So it's going to be harder to keep people around. And they're not going to be able to do good work, right? Organization can lose traction. Volunteer will find a new place to volunteer. Absolutely. So these are all great. In the interest of time, again, I'm going to keep clipping through here. So we understand that we need to tap into, hopefully we're all on board and understand that we need to tap into people's motivation and find that balance between what your organization needs and what your volunteers need. So the second concept is to take stock of trends and motivation over time. So while an individual's motivation for volunteering can be different from the next individual, their motivation can change over time. Also, there are kind of some trends that we've noticed within the field of volunteer engagement or volunteer management that we can plan for and respond to. So I will talk a little bit about those. If you can go to menti.com again. What have you noticed any themes? What is motivating volunteers today to give their time? So generally, what are some broad themes that you've seen? Linda, yes, Menti, sorry, I should have spelled it MENTI.com. So are there some themes you've noticed? Giving back, gratitude, alignment with mission, staying sober, more mission. Community, self-care, pay it forward, joy, rebuilding integrity, sense of purpose, career opportunities, lots of good stuff. We're seeing a lot of big themes around giving back, gratitude, and your mission. So those would be some examples of if you notice themes that either apply to your organization or that you're just noticing in the community. So by tapping into a group like MAVA, which is a group that brings together volunteer engagement professionals from a multitude of professions or fields. You can kind of hear some themes like we can talk about, let's see, I think we're going to talk about how that has changed with time too. So I won't I won't give it away yet here. Here we go. So go back to Menti. If you've been around for a little while, how have you seen these motivations, these themes? Have you seen them change over the last several years? Like I'm able to look back at what was motivating people broadly about 20 years ago versus now, and it's a little bit different. So have you seen any sort of change? And if so, you can go into Menti and share what you've seen change. Focus on grassroots change, seeing more people coming to us for vocational rehab or continuing education. Motivation has increased with stigma reduction and the development of a peer workforce. Awesome. Moving to help their career, wanting certification to become more involved, motivation in social justice climates because of world issues. Absolutely. Peer workforce development, giving back to professional development. So it used to be more about just doing or giving back, but now having some sort of motivation to get something out of it as well. Growth and recovery, motivation and strength. Peers seems to have less interest in helping. So I will, as these continue to come in, I will also share, so kind of broadly, I would say something that I've seen change over the years, and I know like MAVA, the organization that's local to Minnesota anyway, has done a lot of really good research over the years to respond to those changes. So some of them that I've noticed have included like, yeah, when I started 20 years ago, there were a lot of people who were there. Volunteering was just something that people did to give back to their communities. And a lot of folks tended to pick an organization and stick with it. Show up, give me something to do. I don't care what it is. I'm just here to help. And we still even have some of those volunteers. Like we have one who's, I think he's in his 80s or 90s, and he's been coming in longer than I've even worked here. So over 20 years. And he's definitely that guy who's like, tell me what to do and I'm going to do it. And he just Mr. Reliable here every single week doing that. So I remember when we started, there were a lot of volunteers like that. And there's definitely been a shift. And I think it's kind of you can associate it with generational shifts and what motivate entire generations of people. I know there's some limitations in doing that. But one big shift is that people do seem to be thinking through like, well, what am I getting out of this? In addition to just the benefits of helping other people and what that can do for you, for your, for your psyche, for your heart, for your, spiritual fulfillment. What's in it for me? Is it an opportunity to use and develop my skills? Is it an opportunity for me to learn and do some professional development? Is it an opportunity to make some connections in the community, to get a foot in the door? There's also been a big shift between the, like I said, Mr. Reliable coming for over 20 years every week to I want to be in and out. I want to come in, do what I need to do, and then move on to another organization so I can learn new things or do other things. And then all of this too kind of aligns with, even though it's in and out and I want to get something out of it, there's also a little bit of a shift of I want to see very directly what the impact of my work is. So that results in a lot of work for people like us who have to make that magic happen, make sure that what they're doing actually helps the organization, make sure that we're fulfilling all of these motivational needs. So people are learning and growing, people can see the impact of their work, but they also don't want to stick around forever, right? That's a lot, because that means we have to do that with more people over and over again. So really can't overstate the importance of people like you in putting the time into understanding how to make that magic happen and make those matches. All right. Also, so Micah in the chat, in a down economy, people don't have the luxury of just volunteering. Yeah, absolutely. So being able to develop a career path in an area is where they have a passion. Where they have a passion is a bonus. Absolutely. There's a lot of inherent privilege in just being able to go somewhere because you have the leisure time and you can give in whatever way an organization needs. So I think that has absolutely changed because our world has necessitated it. All right, thank you all for chiming in. So we talked a little bit about how these motivations have changed. Any that I haven't covered, gaining leadership opportunities, that can be a motivating factor for folks, meeting educational requirements, using work skills for a good cause, socializing. So lots of stuff that pops up that we need to be aware of and respond to. Also, this is a big thing that I think it behooves us all to really be aware of. And that's, how do people define volunteerism? So one thing that's really important to consider is that there are so many informal ways of supporting your community that may not actually be labeled as volunteerism. So this type of volunteering, like mutual aid, I feel like especially at least kind of where I live, and I think in a lot of other areas as well. So I live not far from Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed. The trial of the police officer starts today. So it's kind of on everyone's minds right now here, and I'm sure outside of Minnesota as well. But following that, there was a lot of community unrest in the Twin Cities area. And we saw people who were really engaged in what's referred to as mutual aid in new ways. And really that's where a lot of the drive and enthusiasm was coming from to help communities, whether it was doing cleanup in communities, showing up for racial justice, helping with folks who are experiencing homelessness, to make sure that they were safe and protected while there was unrest in the community and while there was some policing of our community members that went a little above and beyond what we were accustomed to. So that's something where a lot of these folks weren't getting involved in formal ways through through a local neighborhood organization, but rather developing these networks on their own to hear the need and show up and do it. Whether it's someone on Facebook or Twitter saying, okay, this building was broken into, there's glass everywhere. Can everyone show up and help us clean up the glass and board up the windows? or showing up during protest and saying, you know, these folks are out protesting in the streets. Can we get medics to help them so that everyone can stay safe and healthy? So those are types of community involvement that especially I think have been very common in BIPOC communities. So Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, where folks frequently help extended family, friends, neighbors to help uplift the community, but maybe isn't done through a formal organization. So historically, a lot of formal organizations have put up barriers to this type of volunteering by requiring people to take a lot of formal steps before they can help. And this is where the balance of this entire series, you kind of have to take things with a grain of salt. We'll talk a lot about best practice, but what does that mean? What is best practice? Who set those parameters for what best practice means? What do you really need to do to balance the needs of your organization, safety, risk, all of that, but also be inclusive and make opportunities for people to be engaged and to help? And where are there places where maybe you're putting up barriers that are not helpful? And where you're not allowing people to come in and do what they want to do and what they're going to be doing anyway in their communities, even if they don't refer to it as, air quotes, volunteerism through an organization. So while you're going through this whole series, just want you to think on that and realize that the formality of volunteering, big air quotes, with an organization may not be appealing or even feasible to everyone. So think through, does your organization allow community members to support each other without a strict formal process? And are there opportunities for people who have limited schedules or resources or access to technology to give back in ways that work for them? There will always be opportunities probably where maybe you do need to put some of those steps in, where maybe you do really need a background check because of the risk involved in their volunteer work, where you do need a formal application. Makes sense, but are you thinking through, are there opportunities for folks for whom that is not appealing or possible? So think through, how does your organization allow for that type of engagement? So again, I'm just going to take a little pulse check here. Does your organization invite helpers, so not even just volunteers, but helpers, without a strict formal process, or does it accommodate limited schedules and resources? So options here, yes, we have lots of flexible opportunities and it's really easy to get involved, kind of come one, come all, we'll make it work. In the middle, kind of, we have a few flexible options, but we could probably still break down a few of those barriers, or not really. You'll see a little, I think he's a mouse mascot outside of a locked door. Not really, our process is pretty strict and opportunities are really strictly defined. And again, as you weigh in, there's no right or wrong. Depending on what you have volunteers do, maybe you do need to have a really strict process. But if you do, make sure there's a reason and that you're not just doing it because it's best practice or it's the way it's always been done, or we want to professionalize what we're doing. Really understand what's the risk involved, but then balance that risk with actually being inclusive. So it looks like we don't have anyone chiming in yet with, we're really strict, locked, closed door, no one gets in. So a little balance of, yes, like tons of flexibility, easy to get involved, a little more on the side of a little balance of both, which is great. Okay. So as we're talking about all of this, it's also really important to think through, not just for this training, but for all of the trainings that you'll be going through, thinking about equity in volunteerism, particularly racial equity. So this is a topic that MAVA, the hosting organization for this series, it's a topic that MAVA's done a lot of research on and worked on, especially in the last few years. So you're going to see some aspects of equity incorporated into every module in this training series. And to help us understand the concept of equity, showing this graphic, I'll bet a lot of you have seen it. It's not the perfect graphic, but it does show some key concepts of the difference between these three things. So can anyone share what is different about these three pictures? You can come off mute or share in the chat. Yes, Lindsay, thank you. So transportation absolutely is a huge barrier for folks, not only those you serve, but those who are interested in helping out. So anyone want to, in chat or off mute, what do you think is the difference between these three pictures: equality, equity, and liberation?
So I'll take this
The
one.
building blocks. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you can go, Christy. Okay, well, I was just going to say, I'll hit the difference between equality and equity first. So equality is everyone's even across the board, everyone gets the same kind of help. But when you move into equity, we got to realize that not everyone needs the same level of help or the same level of support. So some people are going to need others, some people aren't going to need as much. So you can see the tall gentleman here, or the tall male identifying gentleman here, or male presenting, I should say, doesn't need a box, he's already tall. The person in the middle, they need at least one box to see over the fence. The person on the very end is short, so they're going to need the two of those boxes to see over the fence. Liberation is removing the fence altogether. That I actually haven't seen these three together, usually just the two. I have seen liberation one on its own, which is hopefully a goal we're all trying to get to, is removing all those barriers that do kind of necessitate the equality equity conversation. But I'll stop there.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you, Timothy. And from the chat too, looks like liberation is Tina, can you kind of chime in with what you're thinking there? Liberation is you're part of a team player.
Sorry, yeah, it's making them part of the team, part of the workforce, making them feel a part of. So they're more apt to come back and volunteer more and do more.
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Lots in the chat here. So liberation removes all barriers. Christy says you nailed it. Most of the social determinants of health are also determinants of volunteerism. Yes, absolutely, Micah. Great. Thank you all. Okay, I think you got this. Is there an image missing of the three? Is there one that you would suggest that there's another image that might denote or illustrate what we're trying to get towards in terms of equity?
The fact that they all have the same skin tone is problematic if you're trying to get to true equity.
Sure. Yeah. So, and that's where thinking through that's where diversity often gets bucketed in with equity too, and making sure that you are actually being inclusive of multiple identities, whether it's racial identities or otherwise. I want to see an image where they're storming the owner's box and taking over the team and the baseball game.
Eat the rich. Wait.
Yeah. Any other ideas?
I mean, I was going to say that, they've made it onto the field, but they're not actually on the team yet.
Yeah, they're not playing yet. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Awesome. Well, lots of places you can play with these images. And if you do any sort of racial equity training as well, I think you can pretty easily find these images as well if you want to revisit them at any point. How this applies to volunteerism. So like I said, in nonprofits and volunteerism, we often discuss best practices. This is problematic because that basically they offer that there's one right way to do things all the time. This often means that the one right way is the one that works the well for usually just one group of people, usually the people who created the system, i.e. those who have privilege to create systems, and not necessarily for everyone in our communities. So in this training series, again, grain of salt on everything, we'll be offering you, ideas of ways to engage, recruit, and supervise volunteers. These are being offered as one of many ways to do this work. So we invite you to think creatively about how to engage volunteers in new ways, using new systems and ideas in order to make your organization more welcoming to the full community. So keep that in mind as we move through. So really quickly, I know we're kind of running behind time, so I'm going to start cruising here. But does anyone want to shout out in the chat or off mute any stories to share for how you've adapted any of your best practices in order to break down those barriers and make it easier to volunteer?
I ask people, I'll tell them what time frames we have available and ask them, are you available any of those times? You know what I'm saying? Not saying that, it's not if I have some days already covered, then I'll tell them the other days that's not covered so that they can see what they're available for, instead of saying, can you come on this day? So yep. I give them a lot of days to work with, you know.
Yes. Awesome. Yes. Great example. So giving people a lot of options so that they can kind of, you know, have a lot of different pathways into your organization can be huge. Any other ideas? Thank you.
For that, we keep doing
Let's
that.
go, let's go Christy first this time, and then Timothy.
Okay. Hi, my name's Christy, and we did an appreciation wall as a tribute to our volunteers in the month of February to thank all our volunteers. And what we did is a wall all to them, and then with hearts, and then their names on it, and then we did goodie bags for to show our appreciation. But we try to inspire with that, and then we get volunteers to also go out into the community to help build our recovery. We're doing a recovery, a living of all recovery, a village, and so we're having volunteers help with that as well, and that motivates them not only to be part of the community here as well, but also to see, you know, that they're helping build their surroundings. So it's really beautiful to watch that as well.
Yes, awesome. Those are great examples. Thanks, Christy. Timothy, you still want to chime in?
Yeah, Christy and I we always jumping at the bit. So yeah, actually, it's kind of, again, similar to what Christy was saying. We actually have a recovery mural on one of the walls, one of the exterior walls of our building, that we actually invited volunteers to help us not only just design, but paint, you know, get the media's attention, you know, get the word out there in the recovery community itself. So that was one way. But we also, but Nikki, I believe you kind of touched on this in a couple of previous slides, but instead of asking our volunteers at Ocarta like what we need of them, we actually started doing like, what is their lived experience? What could they bring to the people we're serving? So if you're younger, or if you are of a certain age, or you have a certain lived experience in whatever avenue that might be, that's where we're going to utilize you within the organization to kind of keep, not just be like you guys said, go file paperwork, you know, go shred this, you know, that's not necessarily why they want to be here. So it's inviting them into our space. Like, this is what we're kind of thinking. This is what we think you're good at. How can we go from there?
Yes, awesome. Thank you. That is a great example. And one thing that, in order to like operationalize that at some point, I used to do a skills and interests inventory. And the idea was someone would give it to me when they first applied, and then we would revisit it like once a year, so that we could actually keep stock of, even if we've matched someone with a volunteer position, we could keep stock of, well, we have these people with all of these skills, we have people with these interests. So if a new position or role or project comes up, we could revisit that list and, you know, query it and be like, oh, we need someone with graphic design experience. We're going to reach out to these 10 people who mentioned that they have that skill, or someone who's bilingual in English and Spanish. Like, oh, we've got, you know, we've got these 10 people who said that they could do that. Maybe they can help us with develop, you know, translating some pamphlets, something like that. So also in the chat, I'm sure you have lots of great ideas. So we're going to move on after this again, in the interest of time, but some other examples that are coming up. Removed a requirement to have a high school diploma to attend the Recovery Coach Academy. That's great. Lessened the amount of time off of probation and parole to require. And then calling out that there are some state guidelines we have to follow and have no control over. So yeah, this is definitely about understanding that balance. And anytime you do have to have a hoop to jump through or a barrier that's up, we can acknowledge that it's a barrier, but be sure to understand why it's there, and how to abide by it, how to communicate that with your supporters so they understand why it's there. So it's not just that you're turning people away wholesale, but you're actually like, this is why, but then trying to find opportunities in the organization that don't require those things. So maybe that don't require, if you do have to have a high school diploma, are there opportunities that you can offer that don't require that, or time, you know, off probation or parole? Are there things that you could have someone who's still under probation or on parole that they can do until they're off? So those are just some considerations to make as well. Few others, let's see. We got listed as, let's see, a vendor for peer support workers to do their official community service hours, help with recruitment. Yeah, absolutely. So making an opportunity for people to do community service with your organization. Let's see, so something similar in Oklahoma as well. So great examples. And sorry to cut you all off. We got to keep cruising here because we're a little behind. You all have such great examples to share. So I hope you'll, as you stay connected with each other, that you'll continue to share these with each other as well. So one of the top researchers on volunteerism is Dr. Mark Snyder at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Snyder's looked at motivations behind volunteerism and shared this quote that we're sharing here. While 2/3 of the population holds a value to volunteering, 1/3 of the population that volunteers does so because of how volunteering benefits them. So again, that difference between folks who are like, I'm just going to volunteer because inherently I feel like it's a good thing to do, versus folks who say, well, I want to tap into other benefits than just some sort of like feeling of this is just what you should do because it's good. So benefiting your career, the social aspect, boosting your self-esteem, and then the feel-good part of supporting your own community, and then understanding what the impact of that is. So when you're recruiting volunteers, which you'll learn about in a different module, be sure that you're appealing to all of those motivations, that you're talking about how you're going to connect people with those sorts of opportunities. So moving along, next concept for motivation is that, again, this hopefully is obvious at this point, but tapping into motivation is going to lead you to make better placements, be a more effective supervisor, and also more effectively recognize folks for their volunteer work with you. McClelland's theory of motivation is a good way to understand volunteer motivation as well. So his theory is based on the premise that there are 3 primary motivators to human behavior. Those include achievement, affiliation, and power or influence. So many of us have a combination of all 3, but frequently one of those is more dominant. So, and when we're talking about all of this, no one style is better than the others. They're just different. Also, our dominant style may change over time and depending on your setting. So you may be kind of a different person at work than you are with your friends, than you are at home. So I'm going to refer you back to your handouts now. So on handout 4, there's actually a little test, and I'm going to take a break to drink some water because I'm about to cough. So pull out handout 4, take a moment to test yourself, and use the setting of yourself right now in your current work environment. So score yourself, thinking about yourself at work in your current environment, and then we're going to reconvene for a little activity. So again, open up handout 4, go through that score, or go through that checklist, and then score yourself to see which one rises to the top.
Is it actually handout 3?
Oh, maybe? Let me check. I might have an old version. So
yeah, I think so.
It's handout 3. Sorry about that, Nikki.
Thank you. I thought I double checked all these. Sorry about that. Handout 3. Handout 3, motivational analysis. It looks like it's page 6. And then your key is on page 7. So take a second to score yourselves, and then we'll reconvene. I give you like 2 more minutes if that works for folks to finish up your scoring. Okay, just 1 more minute. When I come off mute, you're going to hear, you might hear a very animated 7-year-old yelling in the next room. Apologies for that. He's on COVID quarantine this week from school. Okay. Hopefully you all had a chance to work through it here. Go back to Menti now, please. So again, menti.com, menti.com, code 7662-6115, and share what was your most dominant style. Was it achievement, power and influence? Was it affiliation, or did you have a pretty equal combo of more than one? It's thrilling to watch the pie shift. Your first combo. Good stuff. So you'll see as it comes through, there's a little bit of everyone, right? And some people have more than one style. Some people, again, like I said, shift depending upon the environment. I have noticed that, especially when I do these trainings, there usually are fewer of the power and influence folks in my experience, usually a pretty equal mix of those who are interested in affiliation and achievement, which I suppose doesn't surprise me. Folks who work with communities and in community engagement and so on, I think it kind of makes sense that that their styles kind of align with affiliation and achievement. I myself, when I score myself, also I'm with the lone person in power and influence, whoever that is. That's where I end up as well. And I'm usually in the minority in a group when we do these, or I'm one of few. Great. Cool. So as you're thinking about this, hopefully you can think through not only what it means for you, but being able to tap into this for the folks who you work with and for your volunteers. And then from there, being able to adjust your approach on a number of things to respond to their motivational needs. So motivational need can drive your favorite jobs, preferred work atmosphere, how you like to be supervised, how you like to be recognized. So really, like, understanding this and then responding to what someone's motivational need can be really helpful. So gonna cruise along here again. We're running a little behind. So we're gonna skip this activity. Apologies. It's gonna slow us down a little bit and get directly to the best types of jobs. So for each of these motivations, for achievement motivated for folks, these folks tend to be better suited to administrative, financial tasks, research, skills-based projects, data analysis, event planning, developing curriculum. So achievement motivated folks are really focused on, like, I want to do my checklist. I want to understand what the project plan is and see it to fruition, see it get done, set our goals, and then make sure that we're checking all the boxes and feeling good about what we've achieved along the way. Affiliation-minded folks. So good jobs for them include direct client services, public relations, group or family activities, leading or supporting groups, planning or giving recognition. So these are the folks who, what drives them and what, you know, fills their bucket is actually that affiliation, the social aspect, the joining with people, the feeling, the emotions, the one-on-one contact. So these are the folks who, you know, for like recognition, they achievement-minded folks, if you wanted to recognize and motivate someone like that, you might give them more work to do and say, wow, you did such a great job on that project. I'm going to ask you to lead this next project as well and make sure that we're, you know, be our project manager and do all this work. Affiliation-minded folks are probably the ones who are saying, oh, can we get together and do trivia or have, you know, have lunch together, do a potluck. Can we just sit down and talk? There may be the folks who come into your office and want to just sit and chat. Power and influence folks. These are the folks who are well suited for advocacy, policy making, might make a good speaker or trainer, board of directors, political action, fundraising, committee chair. So these are the folks who feel motivated by actually like motivating others and by influencing others. So they're the folks who might say, you know, maybe they're not the best person to project manage and do all the work along the way. Maybe they're less likely to want to sit around and make small talk at a potluck, but make them the director of a fundraising committee, or say, we're going to have you go speak on behalf of our organization. And that's what's really going to fill their bucket. So it's really important when you're thinking about assignments and you're thinking about recognition and how to supervise folks, that you're responding to all of those. So great stuff happening in the chat. Achievement equals tangible results. Yes, they want to see progress. Those are the folks who probably also want to see the impact of what they've been working on. Micah chimes in, all about influence and achievement. Awesome. Lindsay, same here, tested equally for achievement and influence. Wonderful. So nice balance. So let's see. Can you chime in with, if you've got achievement-oriented volunteers, what might you do to support and motivate them? So you can go to Menti, share if you had an achievement-oriented volunteer. So again, the person who wanted to check all the boxes, do the work along the way, very goal-oriented. What can you do for them in terms of supervision, recognition, assignments? How are you going to take care of them? So back in Menti again. Dashboards, yes. Give them more involved processes, track their progress, give a list of work and check over the work after each item and give feedback, detailed goals, clear deadlines, recognize their efforts, clear list of assignments, big projects, checklists, leadership responsibility, open lines of communication and deadlines. These are all great. Recognition for their work, feedback. Yes, these folks love feedback. How can I do this better? How can we improve? Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, in just again, interest of time, what are you going to do for the affiliation-oriented folks? The folks who love that social aspect and one-on-one and connecting and being able to do the emotional piece, the emotional intelligence type stuff. In-person activities, yes. Affiliation-minded stuff, I think they've really been struggling under COVID, right? Warm introduction, listening ear, directly related to working with others, get them out in the community, advise them to be themselves and listen to them, yes. Allow them time because this is how they feed their soul, yes. Reassurement, encourage them to lead groups and meetings. Outreach, encourage positive interactions, make them a mentor. Check in with meeting leaders, testimonials. Interacting with your clients as greeters, group facilitators, regular one-on-ones. Volunteer managers are really good, is a good role for these folks. Team-based tasks, yes. They love a good group project, right? Finally, what are you going to do for those power and influence oriented volunteers? How are you going to care and feed for these folks, these power hungry folks? Outreach, yeah, they could be very good at outreach and selling your program. Making them team leads, yep, they're very good leaders. Give them a long enough chain to lead the mission, yes. So they need fewer of those one-on-ones, but say this is the vision, take us there. Send them to the legislature and do policy advocacy work, advisory board, make them liaisons, leadership opportunities, showcase their skills, advocacy projects, meeting with legislators, sharing personal stories, board of directors, affirming with recognition, advisory boards, ethic committees, lead teams, big projects, advocacy, giving them autonomy and allowing them to implement their ideas. Yes, absolutely. These are all super great. Grant assistant. Awesome. So think about these 3 types as you're learning through all of these modules, because this will influence how you supervise them, how you recruit them, how you recognize them. So keep in mind these 3 types and how they're a little bit different, and you may want to make some adjustments to all of the ways that you work with your volunteers. Front facing, awesome. I think you all got it. Perfect. So 4th concept, recognize that motivation can change over time. And if we respond to that as it changes, we can retain our volunteers over the long haul. So how do you know if someone's motivational needs change over time? A really powerful question to ask is, what can we do as an organization or as an individual to keep you involved as a volunteer in our organization? So consider Maslow's work around hierarchy of needs, and that needs that are no longer met, met needs no longer motivate. So think through, like, what more do we need to do to continue to motivate you? Continue to have touch points to notice when a volunteer's needs have met or have either been met or have changed over time. What can we do to keep you here? It's just simple as that. Have a touch point, whatever interval makes sense to you. It could be within the first 90 days. It could be every 6 months. It could be every year. It could be done formally through like an actual sit-down meeting. It could be done informally by just check-ins or rounding and asking people. So figure out what works best for your organization and go from there. Awesome, Sarah in the chat. So you've been basing some of your work on the hierarchy of needs. Awesome. So the challenge really isn't getting people to do what they want to do. Like, that's easy. The challenge is in understanding what that is so that you can put them there in the first place, right? And you may need to give them some opportunities to do some of that internal digging themselves. So some folks don't even know what they want to do. So this can be a good opportunity to have those like exploratory conversations with folks so they can understand if they're feeling a little lost, like what's going to motivate them and feed them and make them feel like they're whole through your volunteering. So in summary, understanding motivation and matching appropriately is at the heart of harnessing volunteer energy efficiently and effectively. So basically discover what motivates them, match their motivation, both at the onset when they first come in and as it changes over time. And then understanding how to balance it too. So we're kind of asking you to do the world here. So not only meet the needs of your organization, but also those of the volunteers. So it's a balancing game. So before we move on to the second part of our training here, and we're a little behind, so again, we're going to go fast. Any questions on what we just covered regarding motivation? Okay. Go back to Menti. We're going to have another share here. Think about a time that you came out of an interview, whether it was for a volunteer gig, a job, and you thought, wow, that person did a really good job of interviewing me. That felt really good. I think we can all acknowledge sometimes interviews don't feel great and they're a little scary and high pressure. Think about a time where you came out of the interview and you were like, I feel like they really heard me and I feel really empowered and I want to go work there. Share any skills, tactics, or styles that you observed in that experience here. Talking about motivational style, absolutely. What's motivating you? Open-ended questions, yeah. Active listening, absolutely. We'll talk about that in a second. Genuine interest, yeah, actually like listening and looking like you actually want to be talking to the person. Genuine connection, natural, off the cuff, felt valued. Reframe questions to fit the person. Yes. Oh, you know what I hate? When someone just keeps asking you the question and doesn't like adjust it or contextualize it as needed. If someone doesn't understand you, for example. Making it light, finding out what motivates a person outside of work and volunteering. Invitation to discussion. Body language is so huge. A relaxed environment. Strong organizational and natural style. Best interview I had was where I was given the time to ask my interview how they thought I did, as long as I accepted the critique without complaint. That's awesome. Asking how they can help the interviewee meet their goals. Love that. Recognizing the skill set that was actually needed. Motivating to do what you're unsure of. Validate, summarize. These are all great. Wonderful. You all are already good at this. Bad interview though. Can you think of a time where you had a bad interview? What went wrong? You could share a mentee again. Too many personal questions. Yes. Sometimes those even drift into illegal. I've had a job interview where someone was asking me about my kids and my husband, and I was like, that's illegal. Distracted, no eye contact, turned away during the interview. Obviously had no interest in the interview. Talking over me. The interviewer started crying, felt awkward, yes. Rush, no enthusiasm, not really listening. Sexual harassment within the interview itself, that's really bad. Sorry you experienced that. Too long, too much talk about the job. No communication on what the job is before questions get started. They were answering their phone. They asked the same question over and over. They were texting or emailing. They shut me out without finding out if I had experience when they found out I didn't go to college. Yeah, see, that's all about, that's not exactly an inclusive environment, right? Lack of proper hygiene and poor professional attire, unclear guidelines, looking at their watch, texting, emailing. Interviewer fell asleep. Wow, that's taken looking at your watch or texting or emailing to another level, just literally falling asleep. Too many applicants waiting for the same interview. Oof, yeah. Not being present. These are all great. Great. I mean, they're bad, but great examples. So you can learn a lot about the art and skills of good interviewing by basically analyzing someone who does it well, or tapping into your own memories of when you've had a good versus bad experience, and then trying to model against that. So use the opportunity. Basically, why are you doing the interview in the first place? Use it as an opportunity to learn about the volunteer's passion, and again, what motivates them. And then to understand how you're going to design a role for them or match them to a role appropriately. And you also want to make sure that the organization itself is a good fit for them. So you can basically come in and say, like, this is what our organization is like. This is how we approach, here's our workplace culture. Here are our hours. Here's generally our style and approach to socializing and communications and supervision and all of this stuff. So show them it's not necessarily only about them selling themselves to you, but vice versa. Giving an opportunity for them to learn more about you and your organization so that they can also make sure it's a good fit for them. That's equally crucial to making sure they're a good fit for you. So that's an opportunity to do all of that. They get to learn about your organization, your mission, your vision, your values, your culture again. Plus, it's another step in screening our volunteer prospects. So if you have any risk management to be aware of around the protection of your clients, your organization, can be a good time to understand a little bit more about that. Also, a little bit, kind of to understand a little bit about how they would show up at work. Will they impact your team, your staff, your volunteer morale positively or negatively, potentially? Also remembering that as a volunteer with your organization, they will be representing your organization. So will they do a good job? Can you tell from the interview that they would do a good job of being a good ambassador for your organization? And of course, another thing to consider too, and you can talk to Generally in the past, I've with plenty of adjustments, I've tried to match my volunteer interviewing to our human resources staff interviewing as much as possible. Not in every way, because it's different in a lot of ways, but in terms of making sure that we're approaching it legally. So your HR department or legal department can be a good resource for you in understanding any legal parameters around interviewing, and also against bias. So understanding more about bias within interviewing, because a lot of these things are kind of squishy around, are they a good fit? Will they be good for our reputation? Will they improve our team morale or make it worse? That stuff, while it's important, a lot of it kind of is based on your gut, and your gut can bring a lot of bias to it as well. So it's also really important, we won't go into a lot of details here today, but really important to learn about anti-bias in interviewing, so that you can understand your own frame of reference and how that might be applied to your interpretation of them. And then also give you skills to adapt how you show up. So for example, I mean, this is such a simple example, but depending on your culture, you might come into an interview as the interviewer and say, wow, that person wasn't making eye contact with me. They seem really shady. And are they hiding something from me? I'm not sure if I can trust them because they literally never looked me in the eyes. That may be because you're in a culture where you are socialized to feel that in order, that eye contact when you're talking to someone is good, and it's a show of respect, and it's a way of feeling that you're being honest and transparent. However, not everyone is socialized in that way. And in a lot of cultures, not maintaining eye contact is a way to show respect. And so someone may come in having been socialized to avoid eye contact because they're showing that they're respecting you. So things like that, it's a whole, that could be a whole other training, but thinking about anti-bias in interviewing is super important. And then understanding how you can adapt based on that information. Resources for organizations that don't have an HR department. Good question. I mean, Google is a good place too. So look through basically any best practices in interviewing. And again, it's totally different working with volunteers generally, because they may be short-term, they may be not there as regularly, they may not have as much ability to responsibility or position or risk, risk in what they're doing. So it is a little different, but that is, again, if you're thinking about best practices, again, with the grain of salt of who's making the best practice and how is it being applied. But generally anything around, if you can look up anything around legal parameters in interviewing. I haven't heard a lot of stories, and Wendy, from Mava's perspective, if you want to chime in, feel free to do so. I haven't heard as many stories out of volunteer organizations or volunteer roles and bias or discrimination in those, but I think it's always potentially out there. So it's a good idea to think about how you interview both to prevent discrimination and to prevent bias. So I know there are a lot of resources online if you don't have an HR department that's good at this stuff that you can look up, or look for local trainings. So Wendy chimed in, yes, Society for Human Resources Management, shrm.org is a good place to look. Thank you, Wendy. And also the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, they're online. That's a good place to get info. They occasionally have bias and interviewing trainings, awesome. And right now with COVID, I assume most of their stuff's online rather than in person. So you should be able to access it no matter where you are in the country. And if not, based on where you are, you can probably find similar local organizations who do some of this work. Awesome. Cool. So 4 steps in the interview process. The different components are, of course, making sure you're prepared. So I think a lot of the bad interviewing experiences we talked about are because there's something missing in these 4 steps. So making sure that you're prepared for the interview. Do you have information there about the job, about the organization? Are you prepared to talk about those? Do you know about the person you're interviewing? Do you have their resume if you happen to be using a resume? I know sometimes we don't for volunteer gigs. Do you know their name? Do you know their pronouns? Have you think about the actual, how are you going to make a welcoming environment for when they come in, whether you're doing it on Zoom or in person? How do you make it welcoming for a script that you say to them when they come in, for your body language? Think about all of that stuff in advance. Thinking through so we'll talk about each of these steps. So preparing, Again, how you schedule it, of course, reviewing any application or materials in advance, developing questions. It's important to have questions developed in advance. And this is another where it's an anti-discrimination or anti-bias in interviewing best practice, is making sure that for the same role, you ask people the same questions. So you're not making it harder for one applicant to get in than another. So for example, you don't want to ask the brand new person you've never met. You're like, oh, wow. Or someone who's like, yeah, they're just, you're talking about issues with duration from, when they're off parole or probation or what have you. You can't or you shouldn't with someone in that situation say, wow, yeah, I'm going to ask them some really tough questions and make this a 20-question interview to make sure that they're going to fit in our organization. But then you're like, oh, the CEO's daughter is going to come in and interview this for the same role. They know the CEO, obviously. We want to make it easy for them. We're just going to have a chat. We won't actually ask them any of the interview questions. I would avoid that. So if they're interviewing for the same role, ask them the same set of questions and prepare those in advance. I'm just going to check the chat here. So some more stuff in here as well. Some more stuff that you can look up online on best practices here. Let's see. So preparing in advance, thinking about potential for bias and avoiding that, scheduling a time for a private and comfortable place to interview, where you're not going to be interrupted by email or texts or phone calls. Get a good night's sleep so you don't fall asleep, I guess, is something that we need to worry about as well. And then opening and greeting, establish a rapport, clarify your purpose for having them there today, establish the time frame, set expectations for why you're doing the interview and what happens next, right? And how long it will take. Then you do the interview, the actual body of the interview. This might include some background on your agency or organization or program, opportunity to get info from the applicant, such as their skills, their interests, their passions, experience, time, availability, their work or leadership style, their motivation for being there. So all of that sort of stuff. And then be sure to cover any information on available or prospective volunteer roles. So what is the universe of things that they can do? Or if they are interviewing for a very specific position, talking about that. What does that position involve? And then closing, review and summarize, discuss the next steps, make sure they know what's going to happen next. And of course, express your appreciation for them being there. Also, what if it's a no? What if you're saying, based on whatever information you've gathered, you don't have a place for them, either for that position or within the organization at all? There are some suggestions in the handouts, but often they want to know why. So be prepared to talk about why that is. Maybe sometimes you can't share specifically why, but go through and, if they didn't meet minimum requirements or the position is just no longer available, or I've also found it's helpful if we can't make a match within our own organization, have options for them. Like say, well, this position won't work, but would you consider one of these others? Or this position won't work right now. We'll put you on our waiting list. Or this position won't work for you. Let me connect you with this other recovery organization or this other volunteer clearinghouse of opportunities, so that you're doing kind of a soft handout and not just leaving them high and dry. So from the chat, off to their Zoom. Enjoy your other Zoom, Kathy. Thanks. All right. So hopefully that all makes sense to you. Third concept for interviewing, make sure you design good questions and that you are, since we talked about in the best practices earlier too, engaging in reflective and active listening. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So the types of questions that you might use a mix of open-ended questions. So why are you interested in this position? And just let them talk about it. You might ask some situational questions. So in this situation, what do you do? So for example, you might say, when you have a lot on your plate, how do you stay organized? Or when you have a lot of demands on your time, how do you prioritize? You might ask some behavioral interview questions. I'm so bad at these, I hate these, but they are good at actually getting someone to think about and share an example of a time that they did something. So tell me about a time when you faced a challenge and overcame it. Or, tell me about a time that you disagreed with someone at work. How did you overcome that or resolve it? Oh, and that's actually problem solving. So I got ahead of myself. What would you do if you disagreed with a colleague? So behavioral is going to be talking a little bit more about citing an actual time when they did something and illustrating that story. Problem solving in this case is more just theoretically, what would you do? One thing that we do for our, at least we do this, we don't do formal sit down interviews for our volunteers with the exception of interns. So our bringing folks in, it's more of an informal like phone interview. So we don't do like the sit down talking about all of this stuff with all of our volunteer positions. But for our paid staff interviews, one thing we do is send them a guide in advance. We don't share what questions we're going to ask, but we share basically how we're going, how we will ask the questions and how we will ask for them to respond. So that basically we're positioning them for as much success as possible. Especially this is, I think, another good way to be inclusive and to work against bias in an organization. For folks who don't have as much experience interviewing, maybe don't have the benefit of having gone to like a fancy college where you have a career development office that is doing a lot of coaching on good interview skills, positioning folks with as much information as they can have and as much resources and as many tools that they can have to show up in the best way they can, I think can be really helpful as well. So it's not a secret. You're not trying to surprise anyone, that you're really like giving them the tools to shine and to show up as their best person. So I think we're running a little out of time here, sorry. I was going to have you work in groups of 4 to actually practice some interviewing skills. So we'll just talk through it a little bit instead. And if you want to, on your own at any point, in the handouts, there is a practice interview that you can go through where you actually have an interviewer, a volunteer applicant, so the interviewee, and then having a couple observers who will watch you in your interview. If you've never interviewed before, this could be, before you ever interview anyone, this could be a good thing for you to do back at work or with friends. You could even ask some volunteers to help you with this so that you can practice and get really good at, this is good practice both for the interviewer and the interviewee and everyone involved. So you can get really good at active listening, at being able to answer or ask the right kind of questions, being able to elicit information if the interviewee is giving you like really short answers and you want to elicit more information, how to ask those follow-up questions, and then getting feedback from those observers who can give you some tips about how to adjust your approach. So it'll walk you through like all of the steps. So just a good idea to practice in advance if you've never done it before. So again, the observers in that case, what would check for, are you actually genuinely connecting with the volunteers about their interests, their abilities, their skills, their motivations, and are you actually practicing good active listening skills as well? So if we were doing the activity, these are the questions we'd cover. What interested you about applying to be a volunteer here? What are your passions? What do you like to do the most? What skills and abilities do you have that you would like to bring to us? I also like to ask questions around like, so what do you want to get out of doing this? Sorry, my computer was unplugged. I don't want to get kicked out here. I like to ask basically like, what are you looking to get out of this? Like tell me about, in a year, if you volunteer for us for a year, how would you like to have grown and developed? What skills would you like to have either built on or used for the first time? What do you want to learn more about? Where do you want to go from here? And that really is the most meaningful part of having interviews or conversations with folks, to understand when I'm supervising someone, how can I lead them in that direction and make sure, either if the volunteer role isn't going to get them there, either being upfront with them that this volunteer role won't necessarily get you there, and or it won't get you there, but let's talk about making some adjustments along the way. All right. I'll pause just quickly here before we go on to the next concept. Any questions so far? Okay, sorry, I'm just really whipping through this part. Fourth concept, it's important to prepare for any challenges that might arise. So think about, universe of all the things that might come up and prepare for those. This can be also an opportunity if you do some practice to role play through those. I know folks love role playing, right? So brainstorm some of these and be prepared to respond. So some special situations might be if someone's really shy, or maybe they've been socialized in a way where they maybe don't feel comfortable talking about themselves. That can make it difficult for you to learn about them in an interview. So how will you elicit or pull that information out of them in a way that's still going to make them feel comfortable and honor their own style or preference? On the other hand, you might have someone who's really talkative, and it may be hard to shut them down. And all of a sudden you've booked an hour for an interview and it's looking like it's going to, roll over into hour 2. How are you going to make that encounter concise and get the information you need, but also honor their need to talk about themselves? How are you going to deal with the unmotivated? So I think we may have all heard of the voluntold, someone who didn't necessarily volunteer, but they were told to volunteer. How are you going to get at, so this happened a lot. I would often deal with this with like board member or donors' kids, where maybe they were home from the summer or, dropped out of college, and, mom and dad are like, you need to do something productive with your time. I'm going to make you go volunteer at this place where I'm on the board. That was always difficult because maybe you don't know that when you're coming in, that they're being told to be there. But what will you do if that's what comes up? You might talk about like, well, what would motivate you while you're here, and make sure that you're matching them in a place where they're not going to show up and be unmotivated and be bored and disinterested and disconnected, which can influence the morale and the quality of programming for your clients and for your other staff. Court-ordered volunteers, yes. So thinking through how you're going to deal with that. That could be another situation where you may or may not get at, they're really motivated to be there and they're going to love being there and bring them their best selves. Oftentimes I found that they will, even though they're doing that, they're getting the dual benefit of fulfilling a court-ordered requirement. But making sure, again, that from the interview, it can be a good chance to gauge, should we put them in a place, do they feel motivated, engaged enough that they should be with other staff and with clients, and that's fine? Or is it something where they may drag clients or staff down, or other volunteers, and maybe we're going to say, okay, we're just going to start you by working on this filing project for now, or something where they have less exposure to other folks. So kind of understanding that. Perceived attitude issues. So I think, this didn't come up here. This came up in a meeting before I joined you all. We were talking about a new employee who's already turned over, and after just being with us for like 2 months, and I was like, oh, well, what was their experience? And the person said, well, they just had a lot of tude from the second they came in. They had a lot of attitude. So I kind of thought they wouldn't stick around. Something to again, that's kind of a gut level thing. Acknowledge it, be aware of it, but also remember to proceed with caution. Is your bias coming in? Are you reading them differently because they present in a different way? Another issue is if someone wants a position, but maybe they're not qualified for it. Thinking through folks whose time commitments may not match what you need. Any considerations for doing in-person interviews versus by phone versus by Zoom versus sometimes you might do just something by email, chatting back and forth. Any other special situations that you've come up that you want to ask her and ask any questions about? Or you can go into mentee as well. Have you ever had a sticky situation arise that maybe the rest of us can help brainstorm around? Yes, Micah, that is a great point there. Sometimes attitude is simply the affect of a mental health condition. Absolutely, absolutely. So be really in those situations, have it, if you're feeling that gut level, like something about this doesn't feel right, don't just react based on that. Use it to pique your curiosity and probe more, or learn more about them, or figure out where can you make some adjustments. Would it make sense to, like, where I've done that in the past has been, there was a volunteer I worked with years ago who was living with some mental health conditions, and had had success, had some challenges with some of our volunteer placements, in part because the folks who are supervising them just didn't have the skills to work with someone who has I think this person has schizophrenia, didn't have the patience, the knowledge, the background, the skills to work with this person effectively. So basically, I just, through probing some of my colleagues, I did have a colleague who did have a lot of experience. She'd worked in a group home with folks who are experiencing mental health issues. And so I placed that volunteer with her because I knew that she was attuned to doing that really well. And it worked, of course, it worked beautifully, just because this colleague had the patience and understanding and knowledge that I knew a lot of my colleagues didn't have, and that we didn't have time to develop my colleagues. So it wasn't about the volunteer. It was about us being able to meet this volunteer where she was. So other challenges that might arise: past history with the volunteers, stigma or self-shaming, being in a small town, intricate and potentially complicated past histories with people coming to volunteer. Yes. Motivation or lack of motivation. From the chat, also, mental health training is great to take to help with all needs being addressed. Absolutely, absolutely. So that's about taking ownership as your organization. To, again, it's not necessarily about anyone coming to you with something that they're lacking, but about your organization developing what it needs in order to meet people where they are and be as inclusive as possible. Of the stuff that's coming up in Menti, has anyone had any experience with being able to adapt or bridge or come up with solutions on some of these? Background check issues impacting ability to volunteer. Yep. Shameless plug, NAMI provider education and peer-to-peer is useful here. Thank you, Micah.
Yeah, I have to do my shameless shilling for my organization.
Do it.
As far as the background checks, you know, in a lot of cases, we were able to find that we were able to eliminate those background checks. You know, so if you really knuckle down and figure out if somebody needs to do a background check, also explaining exactly what you're looking for in the background check,
Yep.
so can also deal with address some of those concerns.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, there's with background checks too, you'll have some discussion around background checks in a future module. So we won't leave you high and dry in this. We'll cover that in another module as well. But thinking through, absolutely, is it really required? Do you have options that don't require it? If so, and then thinking through, Micah, you made a great point that for some folks, it may not even be an issue of them not being able to pass a background check, but that they just don't feel comfortable doing one in the first place because of distrust of that process or putting your information out and so on. So really think through with background checks. You'll hear about more of it later. Really think through, is it really necessary? And also, if you're trying to foster an equitable and inclusive environment, think about what actually shows up in a background check. Sometimes it doesn't really elicit the information we need. For example, at Planned Parenthood, some of our leaders once wanted to do background checks to make sure our opposition wasn't infiltrating. And I was like, that's not going to show up on a background check unless someone was, you know, committed a felony offense while they were protesting one of our clinics or something, but that doesn't usually happen. So is it really getting you the information that you need? And acknowledging too that depending upon especially your racial identity, your orientation with regard to the justice system and policing, that some communities are more subject to have something come up on a background check than others, only because of their privilege. So being really aware of that as well when you're deciding to do that.
One additional thing, the one time that actually came up as an issue at the National Board for NAMI, I just straight up disclosed to the person who was concerned about it, as like, I have a criminal history myself, and and it did not affect, and here's the line in the bylaws that says, you know, that this will not impact whether or not you get elected or not.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Well, we have only a minute left. Any other questions or anything else? Basically, at this point in closing, we covered everything, even though we had to go through some of it really quickly. But in summary, interview is a good time to ensure a mutual fit between the organization and the volunteer, design meaningful questions, engage in reflective listening, and then voila, you have a good interview. Any questions or anything else I can cover for you before I turn it back over to you?
Great information, Nikki. Thank you so much. I learned a lot today. Thank you everyone for joining us. Again, give us about a week or so and we'll have a recording of this posted to the, I believe, to the landing page. So you should all have the link to the landing page where you got your handouts. And then join, our next session is on Tuesday, March 30th. And in that session, we'll be talking about designing volunteer programs, same time, new link. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Cindy Christie, and we will send out a reminder email as well. So again, thank you to Nikki, thank you to Wendy. We appreciate you coming today and sharing all this wonderful information with us. Everyone go enjoy the 75, well, it's 75 degrees in Minnesota, which is unheard of in March. So,
Is it exciting? Well, thank you all so much. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Bye-bye, thank you. Bye-bye, thank you.